Good evening, everyone. This is the fourth meeting for the Racial Equality Task Force in the town of Mamaroneck. I am Jeff King, town councilman for the town of Mamaroneck. And what I'd like to do right now, I'd like to introduce everyone go around and introduce themselves. Sabrina.
Sabrina Fiddleman. I am a co-council member with Jeff, and I'm looking forward to the discussion we're going to have this evening.
Ellen.
Sorry about that. Helen Horsham-Bertels, a resident of the town of Mamaroneck and task force member. Pleasure to be here.
Chief Paul Carrazza.
And my name is Paul Criazzo. I'm the Chief of Police of the Mamaroneck Town Police Department.
Thank you. Diana.
Hello, I'm Diana Lovett, and I live in the town, and I am on the task force. I have a small business and 2 small kids.
Gonzalo.
Hi, I'm Gonzalo Zabayos. I'm a town of Mamaroneck resident. I grew up in the village of Mamaroneck. I graduated from Mamaroneck High School and moved back to the town of Mamaroneck when I got married and had some kids.
Terrific. Good evening, Andrew.
Hey, Andrew Tannenbaum. I'm a resident also of the town of Mamaroneck and a member of the task force, and have kids in the high school and comics.
Thank you. And if anyone was watching ESPN this evening, you probably saw that golfer that skipped the ball across the lake in the hole-in-one. That was Mr. Altieri here.
Yeah, that's right. Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Altieri, the Mamaroneck Town Administrator. Sorry I'm late.
No problem at all. Well, I thank everyone for joining. And the purpose of this meeting, one of the purposes, is to hear from Chief Carrazza and Steve and our town administrator, Steve Altieri, give a presentation on the initial steps for police reform. So at this time, I will hand it off to you gentlemen.
Okay, well, what Paul and I have been working on is obviously the state issued a manual for the preparation of the study or the analysis they want under the Executive Order 203. So what we did was we identified 7 categories, areas that we thought we would start this whole process with. And then the next steps would be, and Paul's been working on preparing documentation for all of you based on those 7 categories so that we can give you some background as to how the police department operates now within those 7 categories. And I'm going to ask Paul to go through the 7 categories, and then basically just to give you some just real basic statistics about our police department and how it operates. So Paul, you want to take it there?
Sure. Okay, I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of the department. So the Mamaroneck Town Police Department has been basically servicing the town of Mamaroneck for about 100 years right now. It's comprised of 38 sworn police officers. I also have 12 crossing guards and 2 parking enforcement officers. The 38 sworn officers are broken down into a number of divisions: administration, patrol, the detective division, the youth division, and the records division. Each of those divisions is handled by a lieutenant. The department handles approximately 10,000 calls for service per year. Sometimes it's a little under, sometimes it's a little over. This year, obviously, it's a little bit under because people were basically homebound for quite a few months, so there wasn't a lot going on, although there were a fair number of crimes committed throughout the county. A lot of them were automobile thefts and thefts from automobiles, a couple of rings operating out of Connecticut. So far, our arrest rate for this year has been excellent. Right now, we've closed out about 25% of our criminal cases through arrest. The only other thing that might be of interest, obviously, that the police department was available and operating 24/7. It always is. It operated 24/7 through the pandemic, the height of the pandemic. Basically, we had people out and covering everything that went on. We did wind up with a number of officers that did wind up coming down with COVID-19 as a result, possibly of some of the contact that we had. We had a number of people that also were out with symptoms, and those people were mandated to be out of work until we could assure ourselves that they were no longer contagious. And other than that, I guess the only other thing that might be of interest is the response time the department has, I would say, is normally 5 minutes or less to get to any type of call, be it somebody locked out of their house, a lost child, an aided case, or a criminal complaint.
So let us take you briefly through the 7 categories that we've identified, and then the committee can then decide whether there is areas that we should add to the analysis of the police department. So in the order that we placed them in would be community engagement and outreach done by the Town of Mamaroneck Police Department, the use of force policies and the methods of engagement. Here we go back and forth. We actually use the term de-escalation, although the term I know that's been used around the country is escalation, but the same concept. When there is an encounter between a police officer and someone else, what is the form, what is the methods that officer will take to minimize the contact? The type and methods of training for the town police officers, and that will take you through what the academy teaches our police officers now. What we call the disclosure of data and transparency of the police department, what data should legitimately be public information, what data should not for either security or personnel reasons. We're going to talk about the equipment that's used by the police department in order for them to serve the community. You've heard some criticism around the country of police departments utilizing surplus military equipment, and does that give the police department a look that is too intimidating? And that is, we actually don't have any of that equipment, but that's an area for discussion. And then the review of a complaint procedure against a police officer and the matter of oversight and discipline and officer discipline. And then if there were, as you've been looking into this, whether there are any other issues that you felt would be important. What we're then going to send out to all of you, maybe by the end of the week, if not the beginning of the week, will be a packet of information that the police department has put together that addresses these 7 categories. And then we can start to build upon that with all of you as you come up with your own questions about how we meet the obligations of the governor's executive order. The other thing you should know is that Paul and I have done some outreach already. Paul has been in touch with the district attorney's office, who's expressed a willingness to attend one of these meetings, meet with all of you, and discuss where they are in the process and how they can be helpful. I have spoken with the school superintendent, clearly one of the bigger stakeholders in this process, since since we service the largest percentage of schools in the district, Homix, Murray, Central. And then we are going to speak with Mark Levy. I don't know how many of you know Mark Levy. Mark is the executive director of the Community Counseling Center. Mark does a lot of work with troubled families, but also does a lot of work with youth in the community. So his reaction to how the police department can be helpful is important. And then anybody else, that you think might be helpful in the process. And then what we'd like to plan for is that first public forum when we would do outreach to the community and allow them to speak directly to this committee and express their own, questions, inquiries, things like that.
Steve, the only, I didn't see any of the 7 topics, so how would diversity be addressed?
We're talking about diversity within the department, Jeff?
Yes, and going forward, and how could we, address diversity?
Obviously, that's something for those of you that aren't familiar with civil service. It's called the rule of 3. When we canvass for police officers, or actually many of the competitive titles in the town government, we are the chief is bound to hire from one of what we call the top 3 eligible. And many of us have questioned that policy. That's something we would have to, I think you could add it to the study, and that's a great comment to be made to the state government, since they are the ones that could amend the civil service law so that, for instance, it could be the rule of 10, the rule of 15. It's not just, it's a diversity issue, but it's also an issue, and Paul may want to just jump on this a little bit, is when he's recruiting for an officer, what's the pool? How big is the pool that he can draw from? I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Paul.
Yeah, the pool, right now, we have a list out that's been out for quite a while right now, and apparently the list is basically frozen at this point. So we are constrained by the list and by civil service law. And the way I understand it, the directors of the various personnel departments in the various counties throughout the state have some latitude as to how they handle their office. But most of the civil service stuff, again, comes down to the top 3, unless we have a situation where a new test has come out and we have a large number at the top score, for argument's sake. So if it's at a 95 and there are 10 people at 95, you can look at all 10 of those people. You can't step down to 90s. So you got to look there. If it gets down to a small number, you need to look at 3. If there's 3 people left on the list, if you don't want any of those 3, then that list is of no good to you at that point.
Now, Chief, are there separate categories for men and women officers, or is it one list?
It's one list. The only list that's out there that I'm aware of that's different is there is a Spanish-speaking list. We actually had one slot on the Spanish-speaking list that we had taken on a while back, so it still existed. We actually had filled that slot.
Now, it was my understanding.
Spanish-speaking officer.
Now, others, but I thought that towns and villages have to adhere in a different set of standards than cities. Is that the case?
Not necessarily. A lot of times cities do wind up breaking off and giving their test is basically the same test that the towns and villages are giving during the testing, and those test scores are normally out for 4 years. So you can have, New Rochelle can decide they want to participate and have their own list. They can set parameters on it. Normally the test that's given is the same exact test that's being given for towns and villages. And then after that, as far as the training goes, to take it to the next level, pretty much every police officer, I shouldn't say pretty much, that's being a little vague. Every police officer that winds up going through the academy in the state of New York is mandated to comply with the guidelines set forth by DCJS, which is the Department of Criminal Justice Services.
Because I'm just trying to wrap my head, because traveling through New Rochelle and traveling through Mount Vernon, White Plains, and Yonkers, granted their populations are much larger than the town of Mamaroneck, but you will see, officers of color in those municipalities. And I was always under belief that it was because they were cities and not towns and villages.
Well, not necessarily. What you can wind up having happen there is you can use what's called a local list. If you use a local list, and once you start on a local list, you're mandated to stay with that local list through the life of that test. So you can go that route and then take local residents. Obviously, in the town of Mamaroneck, if you did that, I mean, if we're talking about people of color, the percentage is down, I believe, maybe 1% at that point. So whether or not somebody would wind up passing or somebody would even want that. Obviously, in the town of Mamaroneck, relatively affluent area, there are a number of reasons that people that live in the town might not want to take the test at all and might not be interested in that type of a job.
I understand. Steve, do you know of any municipalities that are considering approaching the state in terms of the testing procedures and looking at the type of test which is administered?
No, I don't, but it is, I think, this exercise that every municipality is going to go through, I think it's going to bring it to a head for the simple reason that we are limited, excuse me, we are limited in our recruitment capability. And and as Paul said, for us to use a local list would be self-defeating. There are just not that many people that would take the test. It would just further limit the recruitment. So I'm not aware of any, but I do think this exercise is going to bring it to a head.
I have a question for you, Chief Carrazzo. So of the 38 officers on your force, how many of them are people of color and how many of them are women?
There are 4 women on the police job. Right now, there are no African Americans. There are approximately 3 Hispanic officers. I have 1 Asian officer.
And do any of them live in the town of Mamaroneck?
I don't have anybody at this point that lives in the town. No.
Okay. And just, I guess, a follow-up question on that. So how do you determine what the levels are that you need? You listed off the number of crossing guards and full-time employees. Like how do you figure out what those needs are in terms of how many folks,
As far as which, the crossing guards or?
No, just for all different, for parking, for crossing, and then for the general, force. Like how do you come up with, what that, you reference the number of calls, is it based on number of calls, or what are the metrics that are used to determine the number of officers you need?
If you're going to go with the police officers, normally what we've got is we try to make sure that we can have a rapid response time within the town to service the community. So right now, what we've done for years is we've had 3 sector cars out and then a tour supervisor. So then if you take that and extrapolate it out, you need to cover basically six squads, because again, you're running 24/7, 365 days a year. Then we have some specialization. We have officers assigned to investigations, youth detective who also handles, they basically are intermediary with the school district, but they also handle any crimes that involve children or any crimes against children to a certain extent in the investigations, even though a crime against the child is normally, would be an adult committing the crime. So it would wind up going to the detective division proper. But that's basically how that's worked out. Those are the numbers that we need in order to administer the department and to get the tours out to cover that many tours, along with, sick, injured, vacation schedules, that type of thing. Crossing guards just comes down to the sheer number of crossings that we have. Ensure that we have a crossing guard at each location. Parking enforcement, we basically have 2 people, but they're part-timers, and they basically work approximately, I think, a 15-hour week. So each of them work 15 hours a week, and they're able to cover most of the parking restrictions on 2 posts, some of them on 4 posts down by the Boston Post Road.
Gotcha. Thank you. So you talked about the patrols and the response time, and so can you just say a little bit more about that? Like, are they doing like a loop, or what? Like, how does that relate to response time? Sorry if that's
Well, normally what's happened is the town's broken down into sectors. So there are 3 sectors, and hopefully an officer is reasonably close on each of those sectors. It doesn't always work out that way because we have a call that requires backup. We may have to shift officers back and forth. We have somebody writing a paperwork. They may be a distance away, but normally with the cars on the road and the town, we're able, with the number of officers that we have, to respond within 5 minutes. That's not always the case, but that's the the bulk of the case would be 5 minutes or less. The bulk of the calls.
So are they like kind of circling, or, you know, if they're out on patrol, does that, like, are they sitting in one spot, like at the center of, like a?
No, it would vary.
Okay,
It varies. So they may have a detail that they've been assigned where they're supposed to keep an eye on something for a while. They may be stationary. At other times, they should basically be taking a drive around their post and taking a look at everything, making sure, you know, there are no problems, nothing looks out of sorts. Let's say on the overnight, they wind up going out and writing the overnight parking tickets, which should take them down pretty much every street unless we have something major that keeps them occupied. And as they're doing that, they're just trying to keep an eye out to make sure that the community is quiet and safe. So they should be, most of the time, they should be moving around their post unless they've been giving some type of selective enforcement assignment or a special assignment that they're dealing with.
gotcha. So if they're out on patrol in a sector, they're either kind of like assigned to a specific spot in that sector, or they may be stationary, or they may be moving around, but the idea is just then that minimizes the time between when someone calls and that someone is able to get there. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. And then the other option, obviously, is if they, you know, what the other thing we would hope is that they see police cars moving around the community and they realize that the community is being patrolled properly. And as such, it deters some crime from happening in the town.
Gotcha. And for each patrol, is it like one, you know, an officer, or is it generally like, do you need two people? Like, do you have rules about how many people go at one time, like in each patrol?
Our normal patrols are one officer per sector. They're not doubled up. So obviously what happens there, if we get a call, let's say there's a call that sounds like it could be violent, a gun run or a burglary alarm goes off and there may be somebody in the house, then we would send two sectors down to that call so that there was backup on the call.
Gotcha. Okay. And are they, when they're in a sector, are they always in a car, or do they go on foot, or it doesn't matter? Like, how does that breakdown happen between being in the car and being on foot?
They can get out of the car and move around if they have to, but every officer in the town is assigned to a patrol car. So it's not like the Village of Mamaroneck, for argument's sake, where they have that little downtown sections. They have bicycle police out there. The sectors are more spread out, so we would not be able to have a foot post or even a bicycle post because the response time would be too drastic. It wouldn't work for us.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
I think, Diana, and for everyone, that if you were to take a look at the police blotter, which is available, you'll see the required inspections that officers have to do, and correct me, Chief, if I'm incorrect, but which they have to do on a regular basis, you know, in terms of be it the train station or be it Sheldrake of where. So, you know, I think in addition to just as you were discussing surveying and traveling around the sector, that there aren't prescribed stations and checkoffs that the officers have to do in the course of 24 hours?
Yes. So normally what would happen is at turnout, each tour would have a sergeant normally running the tour. They give them their assignments for the day. There might be certain things we want checked. If we know we've been having a lot of larcenies from the parking lots, they may be checking the parking lots. During the summer, when there may be people doing things on the trails, they might get out and walk the trails, the Leatherstocking Trail, make sure there are no issues out there. We also wind up, let's say, taking dark houses. So what that would be is if somebody was leaving to go away on vacation, or they had a second home, they were leaving for a month, they might stop in and ask us to take a look at their house periodically to make sure that you know, it's still secure and nobody is either trying to enter the house or see anything that looks unusual, where obviously we would reach out to the homeowner and ask them if they had left anything awry. And if not, we would try to make arrangements to go in and check the house out. But so there are a number of assignments that can be given out. And then some of the basic checks, which don't even apply to those calls for service, or just selective details or details that are put out where somebody's supposed to watch. Let's say we're getting complaints on stoplights, or we're getting complaints about leaf blowers, that type of thing.
Chief, what is the communication between the village of Larchmont and the village of Mamaroneck. Because frequently in talking to residents or, you know, we have discussed on the task force that, yes, you might live in the town of Mamaroneck, but you're traveling through, you know, the village of Mamaroneck or the village of Larchmont. And so many people, you know, associate or think of their neighborhood as one, when actuality, as we know, we have three separate departments. Is there what's the form of communication? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Is it are you sitting down quarterly and discussing, you know, common areas of concern?
Probably more often than that. There's very good interaction between the departments, so we deal with things together a lot. The other thing to bear in mind is we're on a common radio frequency, so we hear what's going on in both villages. Matter of fact, normally a lot of times, if let's say the midnight tours, sometimes we wind up running short, and then what'll happen is we'll back up, or the villages will back up, so they'll even roll cars if they hear the call that looks like it might need additional officers. They may have a car roll in to back us up, or we'll wind up backing up Larchmont or Mamaroneck Village, let's say on the Boston Post Road. So we're in first of all, that everybody can hear exactly what's going on in all the jurisdictions. If there's a problem where more help is required, they can put a call out and ask for additional help. Just like there's also a rapport with most of the other departments in the area. I mean, I talk to the Scarsdale on a relatively regular basis, Rye, New Rochelle. So, you know, it's the county of Westchester has venues set up where we can interact, talk to each other, determine what the problems are. There are intelligence centers so we can determine what's going on, and then that information is disseminated to all the administration of the departments. If things are, if we have a situation where things are unfolding rapidly, let's say during the height of the COVID-19, we were on 3 days a week on conference calls just like this with almost every administrator from the county on, unless they were tied up with something more pressing, so that we knew what was going on throughout the county.
Yeah, thank you. And you brought up COVID. I understand during COVID you were on 12-hour shifts, but now you are back to your 8-hour shifts.
That's correct. Although unfortunately, we're monitoring the situation as everybody is right now. So we're prepared if necessary to, you know, do a fallback and go to 12-hour shifts if necessary. Hopefully that won't be necessary, but yes, we did 12-hour shifts. We actually, in order to ensure that we had manpower on the road, we made a few other changes to the way we were putting people out and how we were handling it. But with that and the adjustments that we made, we were able to provide uninterrupted service.
And my last question, and with the 4 women officers, is it the scheduling, or do you try to have 1 woman officer per shift? Or how does that work with the women officers?
No, as far as I'm concerned, they're fully trained police officers. They work. There should be no difference at all. One of them is a detective, so she's obviously got a different area of responsibility, and the other 3 are patrol persons. And you know, there are times when 2 of them are working together, and they handle the job.
All right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Another question. Can you just describe, you talked about the number of calls, but how does literally, you know, when someone calls 911, obviously some of them are medical, some of them are, you know, police, and then some of them are just like junky things that probably need to go, you know, somewhere else. How is that triage? So, you know, when someone in the community calls 911, who does it go to? And then what's the step after that allocates it to either, you know, fire, EMS, or you all? Can you just talk about that process a little bit?
Yeah, so all 911 calls come into the town police department, with the exception of a call from a mobile phone. Mobile phones, because they haven't triangulated the exact location, go into the New York State Police, and then they determine which police department they're forwarding it to. With that said, on all the calls you mentioned, police officers respond. Normally, because we're out on the streets, we're normally the first ones to respond to all of those calls and are able to start doing what's necessary at the location. But we would take those calls then and forward it we would dispatch our people and forward it to either the VAC or EMS if VAC is tied up, and or the fire department.
Okay, gotcha. So if someone calls up and they're like, there's a fire at my house, then you would take the information, the address, and then the police officers would go there first, and then the caller would be sent to the fire department, or the information would be relayed so that both of them show up eventually, or how does that work?
We would take the call. Obviously, we would dispatch police officers on the call. We would take it then, and the fire department is normally dispatched through what we call 60 control. And that handles fire for all of Westchester County. And then they dispatch. So normally the desk officer would stay on the phone with that party so they can ensure that the call got through to 60 control. And then the 60 control would dispatch either the ambulance and or the fire department, both, whatever was necessary for the call. The reason for that is basically they're analyzing the assets that they have throughout the county. So we could potentially, for argument's sake, have both of our ambulances tied up that are in town. They would know who the next standby ambulance would be, and they could reach out to the appropriate ambulance service and dispatch them. So hopefully it saves time and we get people into position as quickly as possible.
Gotcha. So, but 911 calls in the village of Larchmont or the village of go to those police departments. So
That's
it's
correct.
all done by the zoning map.
Right. So the only time you get some vagueness is there's periodically little mix-ups or somebody doesn't know exactly where they are and a call might come from another location. But the desk officer normally experienced enough. First of all, if we're unsure of whose it is, if it's Larchmont's or ours or the village of Mamaroneck, any of the three departments would start sending assets into location. And then once everybody gets there and we get the problem resolved or at least get it stabilized, then from there, we'll determine who's going to wind up taking the reports and dealing with it after the fact.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
I just want to also comment that we do have residents that are in a chat room. So once we complete our discussions with Chief Carrazza and Steve Altieri, that we will open it up to residents for their comments. Steve, I have a question. In terms of next week, the week of the 16th, if we're given the draft on the 16th and we have a chance to look at it, we're working in now or soon looking at Thanksgiving, which is only, 10 days away, 2 weeks from tomorrow. What would be the time frame that the town would be ready for the first engagement, and how many engagements are you anticipating?
Well, I think you would want a minimum of 2. You would want some preliminary engagement to allow the community to comment, ask questions, and that these may be things that you and the committee want to follow up on. You then may want to conduct a survey of the unincorporated town to get, even more public engagement. And then I think once there is a draft plan, that draft plan ought to be the subject of a public forum, public engagement meeting. And then the idea would be you would take all those comments and you would, compose the final plan for submission to the state. So 2, maybe 3 is probably your best bet. But I don't know how the committee's been feeling about this. But I think you'd need about 2 or 3.
Would you anticipate the first forum the first or second week of December?
Yeah, I think we could put probably the second week because we have the budget hearing the first week.
Right.
So it'd probably be better to do it in the second week of December.
And the task force has been looking at sample questionnaires from across the country. And Andrew's put together a very comprehensive list. And I know that Diana has also submitted sample questionnaires. And so I think we're close to a consensus of the number of questions that would be on the questionnaire, the basic format of what it would look like, time frame, not more than 5 minutes, 2 questions. So I think we're pretty close. So it'd just be certainly by that time, or I would think that within the next 2 weeks, we'd be able to formulate and have on paper of what the questionnaire would look like, and the questions themselves.
Okay, so then we would just have to figure out the format in which you want to distribute the questionnaire or survey, whatever we're going to call it. You know, we'll do something, I would guess, through the county website. The combination of the website, perhaps Survey Monkey would be attached to our website for this purpose. I don't know how many questions you're thinking of asking. How many are you asking? You know, roughly?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Helen and Andrew and the task force, I believe the last emails that we were reading and discussing, I believe we were talking in the range of 10 questions. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still subject to kind of some discussion, but I think that, right, that was the general ballpark. That makes sense. Yeah.
We looked at a number of samples from other cities, and so that helped us to think through what we would want to ask in some of the categories, which interestingly match some of the categories that you mentioned, Steve, earlier.
Oh, good.
So I think, yeah, we want to keep it as short as possible so that we can engage folks and have them actually fill it out and submit it.
Could I ask a question, if that's all right? For Chief, I know we'll obviously have a chance to look at the draft and get into more of these, deeper into these 7 categories. But I think it'd be really helpful just to hear, kind of really briefly from you, what your kind of strategy has been. Obviously, these have been issues for a long time. There have been a lot of studies done and reports put out on community policing and racial bias and all types of issues. Just curious if like some context for us as we look at those drafts when we get them, just how you're thinking about it, what you've been doing over the years, and how you're approaching it in these times.
Well, quite frankly, I mean, again, right now, we're looking, this started with a problem, obviously, that somebody saw out in Minnesota. So there's issues going on all over. I think you're seeing more issues in the cities. You get out to the suburbs, the communities are not alike. Quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, right now, our police department has not had any issues that I can see recently. I think our people handle things professionally. At best, what I would be looking at here is seeing, anytime you can do some additional training, it would be good. And there's some training that, if you get into some type of confrontation, there's talks about, again, we get into this de-escalation, escalation thing, but, ways of trying to de-escalate things without it getting violent. That's something we certainly want to look at. I know the county as a whole is starting to look at things because a lot of issues that are taking place around the country have to do with some mental illness that's out there and also some drug issues that are out there. Some of that might turn out to be things that are handled, county-wide on a different basis. Let's say some health workers that are trained to deal with mental illness, whether or not they can set up some type of task force with law enforcement. Not a bad way to handle things. Again, we're dealing sometimes, years ago, some of the people that we're dealing with right now would have possibly been institutionalized and they're out on the streets. So when you hear things like a subway issue where somebody winds up maybe getting pushed off of a subway platform and it's just somebody that basically has a bunch of issues and now basically poses a hazard to society at large, the idea would get to get some assistance for them and maybe get them the help they need or get them off the streets for the time being to ensure that the safety of the community is prevalent or at the forefront.
I guess as a follow-up question to Andrew's, do current officers go through anti-bias or racial sensitivity training currently? Like, what is that framework? Is there any currently, or what does it look like?
There is, I have to take a look. Actually, we're setting up again. You're going to see some of this in this folder we're putting together. So I believe that training does exist right now at the academy, which would mean any officer coming through the police academy would wind up getting the prescribed amount of training that the state has mandated.
Chief Crazzo, if I could ask one quick question, sort of following on those two.
Go ahead.
Has the town given any consideration to more community-based policing? I understand well what you're saying in terms of the town being spread out, so you can't really have sort of a foot on foot beat. That's probably not a realistic option for the town. But has any thought been given to sort of create a mechanism by which community members could actually get to know who the police? We have 38 police officers, so there should be I'm just curious if there's any thought of giving to create a mechanism whereby we can sort of get to know who they are, by name and maybe a little bit by background, and vice versa.
There possibly is maybe some other ways, but the officers do get out. When you see this pamphlet we're putting together, I have police officers that have been at there's something called Coffee with a Cop, where they sit down, people can stop down and visit with the officers, have a conversation with them. My officers have been to the schools, doing lunch with the students, playing dodgeball with the students, the food truck festival, we've been at that. There've been a number of community activities. Sometimes a little easier if you have a community, again, where there's like a main street and people are, not hovering, you're going to obviously have a one-on-one with the police officers there. But as you stated, that's really unrealistic for our community. But we try to get involved in as many of the town's, projects as we can. We have students come in and do tours through headquarters. When Larchmont has their truck festival down on Larchmont Avenue, I usually send a couple of officers down to do kind of a show and tell and to sit down and interact with anybody who wants to talk to them. So we're making every attempt to get out there when we can, whenever there's some type of social event that has a number of people from the community turning out for it.
Town doesn't really have a downtown. So as Paul says, for us, community policing is a much different animal, so to speak, because of the fact that we kind of reach out to the people. Community policing in a bigger city is having a common police officer in a neighborhood, and the neighborhood gets to know that person. For us, it's a little different, and it's activities like Paul has described that gets us out there so that we can, the police get to know the community and the community gets to know the police.
Even in your neighborhood, if you had a block party, I've had times where I send an officer down, they go and just make sure the block party's safe, but they'll stop in, anybody that wants to approach them. The guy, realistically, it's a great bunch of people,
Yeah.
Them with families of their own, and they're more than happy to talk to the kids, and they're more than happy to talk to the residents. So they're certainly approachable.
We had police officers handing out Halloween candy about a week ago when we did our Halloween event at our commuter parking lot. But that's a good example of, the car drives up, they see two police officers, and they see them in a lighter setting, so to speak. That's a good opportunity to meet police officers.
Although people might have thought they were other people dressed as police.
That's right. I didn't think of that. You're right.
But during COVID, actually, we had gotten guys out because they were going around to kids who had birthday parties and kind of were shut in at that point. So the fire department, the police department, and VAC, some other people were going around to try to, lift some of these kids' spirits. So we were out for that also. So yeah, anything we can do within the community to try to, get out and meet people, we do. So, and if somebody comes up with another idea, we'll certainly entertain that also.
And then for the homeowners association.
Yeah, I think those things sound great, and I think they're all extremely important things to do. One of the conversations we were having is, that one of the best things that you can do is when you have an interaction with a police officer is immediately being treated as part of the community. And I will say, Chief, that my interaction with the police has been that it's been overwhelmingly positive. But I think that's a really important aspect to, it's an important aspect to maintaining a positive relationship between town populace and the police force. But it also strikes me sort of low-hanging fruit in a small community with a relatively small police force, to be something that I think is everything you've described sounds great. I actually think I'm going to try to take advantage of the coffee with you said it was coffee with the cops. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's actually a nationwide program, so
Yeah.
I think it'll be coming up in the spring, if I recall.
Yeah, and more of those kinds of things I think are great, are a great way to sort of make this a joint, effort, more so than it already is.
Just a quick question on the, you mentioned one of the categories is review of complaint procedure. So does that mean that you do in fact track all of the complaints that you receive and categorize them and then act upon, the more frequent complaints to try and assess why there's so many and then to reduce? So do you
Well, that would be, although we don't wind up with very many complaints. So I have very few in the last decade, but we investigate them all. So if somebody calls in with a complaint, there's actually a process that we go through, and it goes through the various steps to ensure that we look into it, we investigate it, and we make a determination on it.
Do the complaints come directly to your office, to the police department?
They can, but we'll take a complaint. Again, if it comes in some other way, we'll still look at it. We'll entertain it. But most of them would come in as a complaint to the police department. They call in, and normally it would start at the first line supervisor or the immediate supervisor initiating the investigation, and then we would take it from there, and it would follow through its course, and then. What normally happens with that is at the end of it, everybody that files a complaint will get notification in writing as to the outcome of that investigation.
In our last meeting, and I'll be brief here because I know time's slipping away here. We spoke with Wade Hardy. Are you familiar, Chief? Do you know Wade? Former.
I don't know Wade direct. I do. I've heard of Wade through. Chief Joe Costelli over in White Plains. So I'm vaguely familiar with Wade.
Retired police officer, many years, White Plains, and he's currently the vice president of the Westchester Rockland Guardians Association. And he's working, he's retired, but he's working with municipalities. I know he's done work in White Plains. He attempted in Yonkers, I think still trying to work in Yonkers, but also working with the Scarsdale Police Department, and having a forum amongst the rank and file of the departments to engage in conversation, discussing, what's going on right now in our country in terms of police response, police brutality, police community relations. And to get a sense of, what do the rank and file, what are the rank and file, not so much on the issues, but what are their feelings? What's pressing them? Because I know these are difficult times for everyone. You're under a lot of strain. You just came off of 12-hour shifts. The community's under a lot of strain. But I think it's something worthwhile that we should really look at in terms of not only, because I'm a firm believer that communication is the essence of what we're trying to accomplish here. Communication within the police department, but more so communication with the residents and the police department. So that yes, we haven't had fortunately, any incidences in the town, but I think that sometimes that's a false sense of security. And I think that by having communication and having the open lines, that it tends to decrease perhaps the chance or the likelihood, or when it does happen, that there's a streamlined line of communication. So I think that's something that we look at. I'd love to have you, if you could reach out, or Steve, perhaps reach out to Wade. I don't think that perhaps that the town council or the task force would be a part of that. I think it's something internal that you might want to try to look at. But I'd be interested to see what your rank and file would walk away with on having one of those seminars with Wade. With that said, I want to thank both of you gentlemen.
Hold on, we do have a panel, an attendee question.
Okay,
Well, don't think I'm quite yet.
so we'll let you go away, but Sabrina, if you could bring in the person, I greatly appreciate it.
Ned, you have to unmute yourself. It's Ned Benton, and is Judy with you? Judy Silverstein?
Yeah. Yes, she is.
Okay, Ned Benton and Judy Silverstein have a question for you.
Okay, so the question is for the chief, what kind of data do you collect on your officers engaging with the public, for example, arrests or traffic stops, in terms of the characteristics of the people that you're stopping? Because of course, one of the issues of equity would be, is there equity in how the public is being treated by the police? I know you have your police blotter, but what data do you collect off of that blotter that would let you know whether you're treating people equitably?
There's data with obviously, anytime we're affecting arrests, we would have data, we would have all the information necessary. Sometimes on traffic stops right now, there was a period a while back where I believe the town board had decided, had come up with something, and I think the previous chief had decided that they weren't going to take all the information. But again, we'd have names, we could look into some of it, but some we might not be able to put together the data that quickly as to the, if we're looking at race and that type of thing on a traffic stop, it might be a little harder to compile.
Yeah, because that seems to be the obvious thing. I don't think you make that many arrests, right? Am I right? The number of arrests is relatively small.
Well, certainly if we compare it to some of the cities where there are obviously a lot more people and a lot more issues, yes, it's relative.
And I think in the nationwide areas of conflict frequently have arisen with traffic stops or mental health and domestic dispute. And I'm surprised that you say that you're not collecting data on that, because that seems to me the obvious place where you might pick up a problem. So that's something for the task force might want to think about.
I think the information on race was eliminated from the intake form maybe 10 years ago. Is that not correct?
That's basically what I was alluding to, yes.
It was on the form and then it was taken off.
Right, it was on and then it was taken off. And I don't know whose decision that was. It was, it wasn't necessarily a police department decision at that point. That decision was, it was taken off for whatever reason. Matter of fact, so the tickets don't even, I believe the new ticket doesn't even give you a location to put something like that on, where in the past, I believe it might have been in there.
Because it's not just the people in our community, the residents in the community, but you're also ticketing people going through the community, right?
Absolutely. Sometimes you can get weird. Like I was talking to the chief of Scarsdale. At one point, they all of a sudden were jumping up and down because they realized that they were given a huge percentage of summonses to Hispanics. And what those summonses were for was for leaf blowers, which people were complaining about the noise from the leaf blowers. But if you look at it, most of the gardeners that they were dealing with were Hispanic, and it threw their numbers off. After that, they started discussing what they could do to correct that, which I believe they started trying to think about whether or not they could summons the homeowner as opposed to the landscape company or the landscape employee.
I guess a couple other questions. How you talked about the diversity of your staff, and how many of those speak Spanish on the team currently?
I'm going to say, well, definitely at least 3. I think there might be a few more than that who might have some limited Spanish, but definitely 3.
So if someone calls in and they are speaking Spanish, is an officer who speaks Spanish dispatched to that scene, or how does that work?
Not necessarily. Again, depending on the type of call, if we need to get there quick, we're going to dispatch the officer that can get there the fastest. If we need an interpreter, we can put a call out. If we have one, in the department that's working at the time, we can bring them in. If not, we can reach out to other departments. Just like if we have to, we can get our ways of us on our incoming phone calls to bring people in to get an interpretation of what's being said to us on the telephone.
Gotcha. And the Judy was asking about kind of stats of people being stopped or arrested, but I was wondering, do you guys keep stats of kind of complaints made? I know Jeff circulated the blotter, and there I saw a couple of calls, Hispanic male, we sent an officer, it turned out this person worked for a paving company. Like, do you keep stats on sort of like the Amy Cooper calls of the world, of how many things are called in, just residents like kind of calling in suspicious folks who are not just kind of like doing their job or being visible?
Okay, I know where you're going with this. Well, right now, if we had something like that, we're still going to wind up asking, just because somebody's describing somebody and that's the only reason that they think they're suspicious, we would be asking a few additional questions and determining what we're doing. As a matter of fact, I believe some of the new legislation the state has sent down actually has a section where it may lend some criminality to somebody calling in a racist complaint.
So is that like, has that come through yet? Like, so what do what happens if that, someone calls in, with a racist complaint? Like what?
Well, we haven't dealt with it yet. So if we do, we're going to have to make a determination. Obviously, what we'd be doing is reaching out to the district attorney's office and trying to determine, what parameters they wanted to make. Obviously, we'd have identified the person, and then we'd have to determine whether the DA's office would want to prosecute and what they would want in order to ensure that they could have a reasonably positive prosecution of that party.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think the other part is if it's not necessarily something that's called in, so you have an officer who is maybe in the community and is called upon to address something. So that goes back to the training that the individual officers receive in order to help them better navigate that and handle that type of scenario that doesn't get called in, but they're on the spot and have to, make a call, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, if I think of where that question is going, yes, obviously they're training, and the other part of this is experience. So we have grades of officers as they've spent time in the job, and their pay grades go up until they become a first grade patrolman. And part of that's based on the fact that it takes some time out on the road in the street. I mean, you remember you got young people out there that are receiving a lot of training, but they're being asked to handle everything from somebody getting locked out of their vehicle to potentially, and we do a lot of training on to an active shooter situation like Columbine or Sandy Hook. So that's a pretty broad spectrum that these people are being tasked with handling.
Yeah.
It's tough. And I mean, you can have a job or a day where it's very calm and your world can be turned upside down in a split second. So it's a lot to deal with.
Huge respect. No, it's a tough job. And actually, I think that's a great point that you raise in terms of the tenure, because when you look at the 38 officers and those who are on patrol, what's their tenure? How junior are they? And to speak to how well equipped training wise across several variables, just in terms of psychology and emotional intelligence, everything, how well equipped they are. I think that speaks to what you were just talking about as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which also even falls back to what we were talking about earlier with taking let's say a local list to us taking a countywide list. I mean, the reality of it is our hiring, we normally probably don't wind up seeing anybody that scored less than a 90 on this test than when we're doing our hiring, which also falls into the other aspect of this job, which is, the non-glamorous but tedious part of the job, which is just report writing. And the paperwork that's involved with everything is extensive, and it's very easy to make mistakes on the paperwork.
Sabrina, I see that there are 5 other residents in the chat room.
Yes, why don't we just give them a minute to say, before we say goodnight to Chief Carrazzo and Steve, is there anybody, any of the attendees who want to ask another question? Just raise your hand or something, or type something into the chat.
I have one more question while we're waiting for that. Chief Carrazzo, you talked about the training that folks go through in the police academy, but what if anything, do officers go through on an annual basis? Like, do you have to go for like refresher courses? Like, is there something, you have to get recertified or retrained, or what kind of continuous education or training or is there for officers?
There's ongoing training, so officers receive training every single year. Some of it's annual, some of it might take place every 2-3 years. Some certs, whenever the cert would expire, we have to go back and do refreshers. An example would be right now our CPR, first aid, stop the bleed training is our certifications are expiring, so the officers are going to have to all go back and start dealing with that again. On an annual basis, obviously firearms proficiency is there, and active shooter, which was something that wasn't taking place maybe 10 or 15 years ago, but now after the rash of active shooters throughout the world, it's become unfortunately a necessary piece of our training. So something like that will be conducted every single year, people learning how to clear hallways and enter rooms, that type of thing.
And do you administer all of these trainings like yourself with your own department, or are you sending your team out to whether it's county or state, are they learning the firearm proficiency kind of in-house, or are they going to like a central body or location for those types of training?
Some of the training is done in-house. Some of it is done, at the police academy. There's always continuing education at the police academy. Some of it is done by bringing an outside expert into the town or another location where they can sit down and do a seminar or give hands-on training.
Well, I thank you, Chief. Steve, I thank you for participating this evening.
Thank you.
We look forward to receiving, hopefully next week, your draft outline so we can review it. And we'll formulate the questionnaire and push to launch the first public engagement that second week of December.
Okay, terrific.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
Chief.
you.
Good night, everybody.
Everybody have a nice evening. Take care.
Meet you both.
Well, we briefly had in the chat was Ned Benton, who was the perfect lead-in for the next topic on the agenda, and just discussing.
Gonzalo as well.
I'm sorry?
Lost Gonzalo
We
as well.
lost, we lost Gonzalo.
All right.
Hopefully he's coming back. Perhaps he thought that we were saying goodnight to everyone. But I'll be brief. The Mamaroneck Historical Society. And in reaching out, I know we discussed the Mamaroneck Historical Society in the last meeting, and Gonzalo had the great idea of expanding and looking into the idea of renaming or co-naming some of the streets. And Diana, I thank you for forwarding the posters, which one Mamaroneck had formulated and put together, showing, listing former slaves or slaves that were in and around the town and the village of Mamaroneck. And I've reached out to and spoke to, excuse me, Gail Boyle, who's part of the Mamaroneck Historical Society.
Who's here with us this evening, by the way?
Oh, well, Gail, perhaps you would like to say a couple of words. But in speaking to Gail, she's in her committee, or the American Historical Society has been working on for quite some time in compiling data and the history of the history of slaves who have lived here in town. Gail, perhaps since you're joining us this evening, you could introduce yourself and give us a brief outline of what your committee, what the American Historical Society has been working on. Hello, Gail? You have to unmute.
He is unmuted. I don't know why we can't hear.
Well, in talking, Gail, if you're there, just you can start. But Gail mentioned Ned Benton, who has worked on the compilation of the New Slavery Records Index, which is a statewide index of slaves who lived in New York State. And you can actually break it down when you go to the website, and you can break it down by locale. And it has the slave owners. Unfortunately, it doesn't always have slave names, but you start to get an idea of the number of slaves that actually lived in your neighborhood, or your township, I should say. So Ned has been heavily involved with that. I was hoping to speak with him this evening.
He's
But
actually still here, I think. You want him in too?
Yes, if
Ed,
Ned
could
is still
you
here,
join us?
perfect timing. Ned, good evening.
He's back. Ned, just unmute, please.
I'm here. Hi.
Good evening, Ned. How are you?
Fine. Judy Silberstein is also here, and we're both on the committee about
Realm.
the committee about commemoration of African American citizens in the early history of our community who were enslaved, and their contribution to the community.
And what are you what are the goals? What are the immediate goals of the committee? Are you looking? I know this is a movement or a topic which is quite popular throughout the country, and different municipalities are either putting up statues or commemorative plaques. Or what are you looking to achieve in the town of Mamaroneck, the village of Mamaroneck?
Do you want to?
Yeah, Jeffrey, this is something that some of us have been working on for now. It's like almost 2 years. I don't know if you recall, but we did come and make a presentation to the town board. And
I was maybe very moved by that. Yes, I did, most certainly.
And it grew out of a couple of things. Ned's research goes way back to the, it's almost like 10 years now, when he started doing the history, looking into the history of enslavement in the town of Mamaroneck. And there actually, when there were very few residents of any kind, there were proportionally quite a large number of enslaved people here. And our goal is, first of all, to recognize that that is the case, because it always hits people as somewhat of a surprise that there was slavery in the North, because our history that we learned in elementary school and high school tended to say it was all down south, and it was the South. And when people think of enslavement up here, they think of, oh, well, maybe there were a few butlers or something, but there was plantation slavery up here, and people don't recognize that. So first of all, education, that we want the community to know that that is the case. And second of all, that most of the people who were doing the work back in the day were not the gentlemen whose names we remember. Mr. Delancey was not out there building the community. So we'd like to recognize that the actual foundation, if you think of foundation in terms of work, were done by people who were enslaved Africans. They were, kidnapped in Africa, brought here, and they were doing the work. I mean, there were certainly other people doing the work too, but we don't recognize the foundational contributions of the enslaved Africans as we should. So education, recognition, and yes, possibly we would like to have some sort of tangible memorial to recognize these contributions in the same way as we have tangible monuments to other people who have contributed to the development of our community, as in the street names, as in other names, as in plaques, as in statues. We're not quite sure yet. We're to the point that we've developed our mission statement, and we are now expanding into action committees. So we're going to be meeting next week. And we do have a website that will be going live at some pretty soon.
Julie, would it be presumptuous to think that perhaps Black History Month 2021, that Historical Society could have a presentation, could have a forum?
No, that Ned has presented at the Martin Luther King events at least once, maybe more than once, and has done educational programs about.
But we're very much willing to do something like that.
We're open to doing something a little bit more targeted. Sure, absolutely.
I also think if we take this and just roll the centuries forward, if you think about the election when Lincoln was elected, in New York City and in the surrounding counties, and particularly in Mamaroneck, we didn't vote for Lincoln. We voted for the other guy. And you know, this is not something, while remembering the history of enslavement back in the 1600s and 1700s and early 1800s is important. It actually rolls forward.
Interesting, very interesting. Listen, and I've said this many times, I've said it to the task force, that it was an education for me, Ned and Julie, when you presented to the town board, I believe last year, seeking funds for the Delancey burial project. I thought it was very informative, and I think it strikes a chord that needs to be shouted and discussed in our community, because I agree wholeheartedly in what you're saying, that we do not realize the number of enslaved Africans, enslaved people here in our local neighborhood, in our local town. And I think that now's the time, more so than ever, if we can harness some of the energy, because, I have teenage kids, and they want to know the information. They're seeking out the information. They're looking to learn as to the makeup of of their history. And I think that if we could have another, or you have another forum during Black History Month this year, that perhaps the Racial Equality Task Force could assist, I think that could really be a benefit for the community as a whole. So that's something which we'd like to discuss, and also going forward, what type of or memorial or dedication that we could have somewhere in the town so we can recognize the contribution, Julie, as you were saying, that enslaved people had on our community. So I welcome the communication, and I welcome a partnership that we could have between the Racial Equality Task Force and the Mamaroneck Historical Society.
Jeffrey, just a point of that's wonderful to hear. I just want to correct perhaps a misimpression. Our committee, which we're calling REALM, REALM, is not the same as the Historical Society. Gail and John, who are the co-presidents of the Historical Society, are on the committee,
Mhm.
The committee started separate from the Historical Society, and we have members of the Larchmont Historical Society as well. And they're members of the art community. We have members from the library, lots of different people, but we're not the same as the Historical Society. And when we came to you to make the presentation, it was as that committee, not as the Historical Society. So there's so much overlap, it's easy to get confused, but we are.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah. But
Uh,
yeah, it would be wonderful to partner with you.
Terrific. Any questions, any comments from any of the members?
Well, just kind of like getting down to the, brass tacks, you talked about renaming streets, like which specifically, Palmer, Richbelt, like there was lots of enslavers that had streets named after them in our community. So like, it's a great idea. Let's do like which ones would you recommend? And then what would you change them to, I guess?
If we could just be clear that the Realm Group is not recommending that idea at this point. I mean, we're not there yet. We're studying all kinds of ideas. And we're certainly not down to, picking streets to rename. We think there are a lot of examples of things to do from around the state and around the country, and we're open-minded to consider a lot of different ideas. But there definitely are a lot of streets that are named after people who were slaveholders. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, sorry, I meant that for Jeff because he had floated that last time.
Well, and I think one of the Gonzalez, too bad he jumped off, because I think Jeff, you alluded to his idea last time, which was, I think, quite elegant, which wasn't necessarily renaming a street or a street, but putting some, whether it's a plaque or if there's some intersection of a street like a Palmer with some honor to a slave name, that would be a really interesting way to raise awareness rather than take a name away. So there's lots of ideas like that we could think about.
Why would you not just change the street? I mean, I went to Yale and they renamed a college that was named after an enslaver. Like that's a pretty common, like why would you not rename the street if it was after, like, I guess I'm not sure what would be the purpose of that. Yeah.
I think there's several. I think you have to look at the state level in terms of renaming streets, because some of these streets are, going through the county and going through the state, and I think that it's a matter of acknowledging, and I think you can acknowledge, and I think you can bring awareness. The same time having the same street, and I think sometimes that it's equally as educational to have that name above or below Palmer Avenue or Delancey, to say that that person is associated with the, these enslaved people that were here in town. So, so I think it's something that, as Andrew is saying, that we have to look at. That we just discussed the first time. I do not have a list. I do not know what streets. Something which I would again listen to what Ned and Julie and their cohorts have to would offer. So I think it's presumptuous right now to say that this particular street or that particular street or would-be streets. So what I'd like to do is, Ned and Julie, I know this was not planned, but perhaps at our next task force meeting, if you could perhaps present to the task force an outline of what you'd like to present or form in January. And we could discuss that at greater length and
Jeff?
for January.
Jeff, our group is going to be meeting next Thursday.
Mhm.
we're not, as enthusiastic as Ned and I might be about your idea, I think we better bring it to the larger group.
I understand.
And we can discuss, we're already in the planning stages of trying to do something educational, but when you say, let's do something in January, and what is it going to be?
I mean,
Come tell us
for-
about it
for
next week.
January,
We
but
might
this
need to
is-
have a
yes.
little consensus.
Right. I understand. Okay. Well, let's do that. Let's walk before we run and speak to
Terrific.
the committee.
Is,
We will, I will communicate with you and you and Ned, and we'll plan a strategy for going forward.
in the meantime, I'm sorry if I missed this, but is there, Ned and Judy, some written history that we could read? That's part of this project.
Yes, we can send you links to resources that are about the project and about enslavement locally.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
Yes,
Thank
our Thursday
you.
meeting is to finalize the wording of the website, but the website has links to Ned's research that goes back years. So there's the resources, the list of enslavers, the list of enslaved, various articles about it, and then our mission statement.
That'd be terrific.
Judy and Ned, if you want to send it to me, I can forward it to our
Great.
entire group.
Terrific, Sabrina.
Great.
I'm the easy one to get to, I think.
And again, I said January, but I was saying February when I'm speaking of Black History Month. So got my months mixed up, but I think that'd be terrific. So we look forward to receiving the information and moving forward and working together.
Just so you know, all of our attendees this evening are members of that group of Brown. Everybody listening in tonight. Is that correct, Ned, Judy? We have Gail, John Pritz, you two, and Joanne Shaw.
Terrific.
We don't literally know who's here.
I'm just telling you, it's you.
Okay, yes, we
John
believe you.
Pritz, Joanne Shaw and Gail Boyle. So
Great,
all-
terrific,
Yes,
wonderful.
We're all, those are all, but the group is actually up
Much
to
bigger.
about
Yeah.
14 people. So yeah.
Anyway, all right, but we thank you very much.
What does the REALM stand for?
Oh dear, that was a hard one. I think it's recognizing enslaved Africans of Larchmont, Mamaroneck.
Okay. That was easy. Thank you.
Yeah. Easy to say, hard to remember.
Thank you, guys. Thank you
Thank
very much.
you. Thank you very much. And that brings me to our two things. And speaking to what Paul and Steve just said, the timeline of week of November 16th, next week, to receive their draft outlined, the seven issues which they're going to address. I think that we should work towards having that public engagement the second week of December. We definitely can't have it the third week. Coming up against the holidays, both Hanukkah and Christmas. It's just too much going on in December. I prefer to have it the first week if possible. So I will speak to Steve in regards to that. Diana, I thank you for your forwarding the sample. I think that Google survey would be more than sufficient. I think that, as Lynn was saying, 5-10 minutes, a 10-minute or 5-minute survey, 10 to 12 questions is ideal. Andrew, and I thank you for forwarding. I particularly liked the Fort Worth questionnaire.
Yeah.
Do we have copyright issues if we take them directly?
No, it's a public entity. I don't think they have copyright rights in the survey.
Just making sure.
Well, just one thing with the 7 categories that Steve and Paul mentioned. Should diversity be added?
Most certainly.
Yeah, so is that something that you could take back to them to add that 8th category?
Most certainly.
Okay.
And that's what I was asking the questions, Helen, in regards to, the hiring and,
Yeah.
yes, that's a key component. Now, as we know, 38 members, of whom only 4 are women, 3 Hispanic, and no African Americans. So yes, most certainly.
Can we do a little, just housekeeping? We have some more meetings on the books.
Yes.
And one of them is not going to work for us, Jeff. The next one, 11/23, we have a town board meeting that night.
Correct.
And then you get really close to Thanksgiving.
Right.
You guys, you want to make it the following Monday, the 30th?
I'm thinking, yes, particularly if we're looking at possibly having this public forum the week of December 7th. What's everyone's availability for the 30th?
Yeah, that works for me.
I can do that.
Be okay for me as well. Yes.
Just about the survey, and I did shoot this over email. What is the what's the plan for distributing it? Because I think that'll really impact, we're not a professional survey research firm, and methodology, it has a huge impact on outcomes. So how we distribute this will dramatically affect the type of responses and sort of the value of the data. So like, what is the plan for, reaching folks? I know the town has a newsletter, but I'm not sure, the Venn diagram of, residents versus, people on that mailing list. Like, how do we think we're gonna reach folks to fill this out? And, how specifically are we gonna reach folks that we really want to, people of color that we really want to hear from? I think, we spent a lot of time kind of thinking about the survey, but if we don't have a good mechanism for, getting respondents, then it might not be as fruitful as we had hoped.
Well, that's a good question. I think first of all, it's the responsibility of the town, of the town administrator to disseminate this questionnaire, and because go down to the bottom line is that the town's responsible for forwarding, and this response to Executive 203 is going to have our town supervisor's name on it. So it's this is coming from the town. To your question, and we don't have the time for professional marketers. I don't know if it's a matter of a combination of the town putting out a robocall or several robocalls and putting the questionnaire on our town website. So that's something that I would leave it up to. I am not an expert, not by any means, in terms of mass marketing. So I would lean on if anyone has suggestions or experience, and these type of surveys, or putting out surveys. But the impetus, it would have to come from, I would think it'd be issued by the town, and obviously with our input or our survey.
Yeah, it starts with data, right? And because if the town has a list and emails, I think we need to find out what data we have. So if we know that we have an expansive list to which we can email the survey, I think the idea of having it on the website as well and doing the calls, so call to action, that those efforts combined should get us there. But we need to know that we have, whomever we miss in terms of not having email, then we get hopefully some of them back through having the survey available for a certain period of time on the website. This is reiterating some of what you've already said, but the data, it starts there. What do we have? What's the starting point? And is there work that needs to be done in order to get to the breadth in terms of the list that we would want to have to get the representation that Diana is referring to?
What if I was to do this? Oh, I could reach out to speak to Steve tomorrow.
Could I also suggest, I don't even know the answer to this question, Andrew and Diana might know. Is there such a thing as the Friday newsletter coming out of the schools anymore? There used to be a weekly Friday communication from the school to the parents. I don't know if that happens anymore.
Yeah, yeah, you get a weekly, like, something, from the school, and then you also get, if you're on the mailing list for the PTA, you also get it from the PTA.
So perhaps we could ask the Homix, Murray, and Central School papers to include that, because that's where those are the schools that are in our municipality.
Yeah, I mean, I would I guess, Jeff, if you're asking for input, I think, the obvious places are, the email addresses or the names that you get that the town has. But as we know from trying to conduct a census, I mean, you can contact people a number of times. It doesn't mean they're gonna, necessarily do it.
Right.
So I would say, I mean, you guys, I assume, Sabrina and Jeff, you probably have a better handle on who lives where. But, I maybe working, hand in hand, if we think, I know part of Larchmont Acres is in the town, if we think there's lots of respondents that we want to hear from within that, maybe we can work with, the company that, runs that to see if, flyers can be distributed. But I would just I don't know that, the kind of map of the town and sort of where we would want to focus well enough to give super insightful. But I would just say if there are particular areas or demographics we're really trying to reach, I think just putting it out there and being hope they answer probably we're gonna have to be more targeted. So that's something that I would recommend, but I guess I would need info from you guys as to I know I have the list of what streets are on it, but that doesn't make a mental map for me of where those lines are. So, and then I would say the other, kind of community organization partners, community groups within the town. I think the challenge then is because the borders are so porous that you're going to get a lot of respondents who, may believe they live in the town, but don't, or whatnot, just all that malarkey.
I think we also have to consider language. So at least Spanish, at minimum.
I agree.
Well,
so we need someone who can translate English to Spanish. Do you guys does the town have no, who do you guys work with for translation, or what do you do when you need something translated?
Can't answer that. Do you know, Jeff?
That's a very good question. I don't know.
But it's easy enough to get.
It's easy enough to find. It's easy enough.
The schools do that. And a number of communications will have a Spanish version.
Right. So that's easy enough to find.
Yeah.
But for the actual survey, would you guys want it? I know maybe too detailed, but the sample survey I sent, it has a question, and then there, we can do drop down, open-ended, or whatever. We could do everything in one survey if you want, describe your relationship with the police, just making up stuff, and then have that translated in Spanish, and people put it in there. Or we could have two. I think the complexity might be high if we had more than one survey, just keeping track of all of that. But yeah, so I guess I would say I think we probably need to spend some time thinking about distribution, because otherwise we'll put it out there, we'll get like, you know, little old ladies to answer it, and it won't give us the information that we're looking for.
Today was any any sign of people not receiving or reading what they get? You know, the fact that recycling wasn't happening today, the number of homes I saw with recycling out, missing the message completely, and the coal.
It's really hard to get in touch with people on, you know, in the community. People just aren't interested in responding to the town. That's just life. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
Yeah.
Let me do this. I do have some, let me make some phone calls, Diana, and I will get back to everyone by Friday, perhaps with some ideas on methods of distribution, right? And how we can go about getting this survey out.
And I'm happy, Diana, to work with you if you want to do that, for us to come up with a survey sample, you know, something to put in front of the, you know, how we want to approach that, like getting to the final product. Diana, I'm happy to jump in and support that as an effort.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I can make it, making it on the back end is easy. You know, once you have the questions, that'll take me like 15 minutes. So yeah, if you want to do the questions, I'm happy to turn it into a survey. I'll need a, you know, Spanish speaker to translate whatever you send to me. But actually turning it into a viable survey is like, that's
Remember, I was the one who sent 100 questions, so I'll narrow that down to,
I was going to ask Andrew for that. Yes, to assist for that. Yeah, just to
maybe
condense it somewhat. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
maybe the two of us can work on getting the survey down to a manageable size.
Yeah.
And just for frame of reference, the like silly one I sent you with the food, I chose all different types of questions. So there's like multiple choice, there's drop down, there's open-ended, and I think there's check all that apply. So just when you're sending me the question, like if you're, and I think you can rank things. So just, I included all different types of questions in that. So just if you can specify, like, you know, we want this as a drop down or multiple choice or whatever, just so I know how to lay it out in the survey, if that makes sense. Just specify what type of question it should be created as editable. So like if, you know, after you send it to me, you're like, that's not right, I can certainly change it, but
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Well, Sabrina, I still see there are 5 people in the chat room. That's old, isn't it?
Nobody's here anymore.
Okay. All right. That's why I thought that to be the case.
Yeah. Oops, I just lost you guys. Okay.
Yep, I'm still here. Well, I thank everyone for this evening. It took me a while, and I'm still recovering from the elections. So if I had my way, I'd go down to Georgia and knock on doors, but I think it's a hot state, and I'd have to quarantine even longer than what I'm quarantining right now for. So, but I will certainly get back to everyone by Friday in terms of distribution. And I think now finally we're starting to pick up some momentum, and look forward to receiving this draft. And Helen and I will reach out to both Steve and Paul, and most certainly have the 8th for diversity.
So we meet next on the 30th.
Correct.
On the 30th, yes,
Okay.
At 7.
at 7 o'clock.
That work for you, Diana? Too
Yeah.
early?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
All right.
So everyone, please have a healthy Thanksgiving.
You too.
You're traveling. You're traveling.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.